last night had the chance to go and watch the new Eli Roth, directed film, A House with a Clock in Its Walls. You got, of course, Jack Black and Cate Blanchett in it. And look, I'm going to tell you what, I was not looking forward to this film. Number one, the trailers have not looked all that intriguing. I understand it's based on some kind of book, but clearly I never read it, so I didn't care. And honestly, seeing like a family-friendly kind of creep film, it felt like it was kind of in the vein of a Goosebumps, which also had Jack Black in it, and I didn't like that film. But the fact that you had Eli Roth directing it, I thought was very odd. Sometimes Eli Roth is just amazing. Sometimes he stumbles a bit, like Death Wish that he did with Bruce Willis. But I just didn't see that this movie was a really good fit for him. So I went to go see it last night. What did I think of A House with a Clock in Its Walls? Honestly, not all that bad. I'm going to tell you right up front, though, the absolute best thing about this movie, like when this movie is firing on all cylinders, is the scenes where you have Jack Black and Cate Blanchett in scenes together just talking. I'm telling you what, this movie had a 1 hour and 44 minute runtime. If this movie was 1 hour and 35 minutes of just the two of them talking with some random other 9-minute stuff, I would have enjoyed the film. And you know what? Just like I said that Eli Roth didn't really feel like a great fit for this movie for me going into it when I was thinking about it, I could not see Cate Blanchett and Jack Black together. Despite the histories in the past, I just could not see the two of them having on-screen chemistry and it working really well. And you know what? It was great. Again, the very best thing about this film was the dynamic and chemistry between Black and Blanchett. And you know what? That brings up something here. Jack Black has gotten better and better and better. Like, it used to be that Jack Black was just this like wild, loud kind of performer and he'd do all this kind of stuff. But you know what? Over the years, and we saw a lot of this in Jumanji, he's learned how to bring subtlety, like when to go, wah, and when to reel it in. And he's learned subtlety to add to that. And that just adds to his performance. So easily the best part of the film. Connected to that is another thing that I thought worked pretty well with the film. And that was the humor. It's good humor. There were more laughs in the theater that I was in last night than I thought was possible for this movie. Now, don't get me wrong. This isn't an A-list comedy. It wasn't laughs from start to finish, but there were certainly a good amount of humor and good chuckles and good laugh out loud moments peppered throughout the film that hit where I've seen a lot of other films like this try to do their humor and it misses completely. But the humor actually works pretty well in this. The other thing that's pretty good about this movie is this. Eli Roth finds a really good way of balancing a story that has these horrific, dire consequences and yet manages to tell the story in a very light kind of way that brings you as an audience member along with it. Now, if you've seen the trailers for the film, you know there's this young kid named Lewis whose parents have passed away, and he's sent to go live with his uncle Jonathan, who just happens to be a warlock and lives in this big mysterious house. Unbeknownst to Lewis, the previous owner of the house was an evil warlock who somewhere in the walls of the house hid a magical clock that is counting down, but we don't know what it's counting down to. Dun, dun, dun. So there's the mystery of it. And so the film has these dire, dire consequences, which could be very heavy, like a horror kind of film. And yet, Eli Roth manages to keep it pretty light and pretty engaging. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows for A House with a Clock in Its Walls. Number one, this movie tries to be a lighter toned, yes, and funny, family-friendly horror film. Like, they wanted to bring scares. You could tell they were going for scares in this film. Unfortunately for me, nothing that was trying to be scary was ever scary. There's a couple of moments that are a little creepy, and Jack Black says a few times in the movie, creepy, and those are actually pretty well done. But there's a couple of lightly creepy moments, but for the most part, the Goosebumps angle, that slight family-friendly horror angle they tried to take, which can work and can have some success, just kind of basically fell flat. Also, the film has some pacing problems. I mentioned before, it's only an hour and 44 minute long film, but even at an hour and 44 minutes, it felt too long. Like, this is one of those movies that probably should have clocked in at about, no pun intended, clocked in. Anyway, this is a movie that probably should have come in at about an hour and 35 minutes. I just think it would have felt a little bit more crisp and a little bit along the way. Also, I'm going to say this. There's nothing huge to talk about in this movie, other than the Jack Black and Cate Blanchett chemistry, which is great, it's not overwhelmingly great humor. It's not super memorable characters. It never takes any element of the film and really does them exceptionally well that would leave you as an audience member walking out of the theater going, I can't wait to watch the next one. I walked out of the theater having been mildly entertained. And I think the Rotten Tomatoes rating on this movie right now kind of shows that. It's a positive rating, but it's in at about 62%. So not great, but not bad. I walked out of the theater mildly entertained, but certainly by no stretch of the imagination did I walk out going, man, I can't wait to watch that again, and I hope they do a sequel. So anyway, to recap, The House with a Clock in Its Walls, or House with a Clock in Its Walls, it does a couple things very well. Number one, the chemistry between Jack Black and Cate Blanchett, surprisingly good humor, and despite the fact that it's a movie that tries to purport really heavy, dire consequences, it manages to maintain a pretty light, entertaining, easy to digest little piece of entertainment. However, there are negative things with the film as well. Starting with the fact that even though it's kind of obvious they're going for some scares and they're going for some spooks, they never really hit it on that level. Also, I didn't mention this otherwise, but there's a villain in the film. Every film has a villain, but even though the villain is alluded to a little bit, he doesn't really come into play until very, very late in the film. And by that point, you can't get invested in the villain at all. So that kind of fell flat. And as I mentioned before, it's a movie that kind of feels slow in some places. Like minute 44 is not too long for a film of this nature, but it was a little bit too long for this specific film. I feel like they should have cut a good 10 minutes of this film out. Might have enjoyed a little bit of a better pace. Overall, A House with a Clock in Its Walls was actually not a bad little time at the theater. I was expecting trash, and I walked out going, you know what? Not bad. I'm not going to sit here and tell you should rush out and see it this weekend, but I will say this. If you have been curious about the movie, it's one you might want to check out, so keep that in mind.